Hola, y'all. Hello, guys and gals. This is Jay Leeper with Behind the Grind, the Pro GM Chronicles. So, I am fortunate enough to be able to have with me him with Quest Portal, and she has taken some time out of her day to be able to answer a few questions just on her position with the with Quest Portal, a little bit about herself, and also pro GM advice that she might be able to offer people that are interested in trying to make this a part-time or full-time job. So as always, folks, we're looking for ways to be able to expand on this. Encourage you guys to interact with questions. Be glad to come back and address things. But more than anything else, we just want to have fun. So, Hem, thank you so much for taking time to be with us today.
You're very welcome. I mean, it is like 7 o'clock, so I will definitely be getting some after hours pay for this one.
There you
So
go.
I appreciate that.
It's a total win-win situation.
Yep.
Very cool. Okay, so if you wouldn't mind, just tell our audience a little bit about yourself. I know that your position with Questport is customer relations project manager. Is that correct?
Sort of. So I came on originally on board as community and content and question mark, we'll figure it out as we go, which is basically evolved into I am now the manager slash head of content and community at Quest Portal. I kind of just take care of reaching out to like indie creators and listening to our community feedback and actually making sure that like, hey, this button doesn't work, or hey, this would be a great new feature, of making sure those get heard and that the things that are more of a necessity for like a core use of a virtual tabletop is kind of slightly louder than a. I kind of would like it if I could change the color of this. There's a subtle difference between the urgency on both of those, so I'm kind of there to sort of help out with that. And like on the content side, it is very much making sure that like when we add books to the library, that they're actually of a good quality and making sure that they actually get done and that they're reviewed properly. Because as you might expect in the RPG world, English is an extremely big market, and everyone at Questport, apart from me, is Icelandic. So they're dealing with second language, and they're just like, "Hey, you have a fancy English. You go ahead." And like, yeah, fancy English. Okay, oops.
If it works, totally cool.
Exactly. So yeah,
So,
that's kind of me at Quest Portal. I kind of actually got started with them because they started about 3 years ago. They're a startup out of Iceland, and basically three of them got together. Were like, we want to play online. None of the VTTs out there are suiting what we want. We want it to be easy to use and look really nice. So yeah, the three of them are kind of heavily into coding and the AI world, and are huge RPG nerds. So it's kind of like a marriage made in heaven. So they kind of kicked off the company about 3-ish years ago, and I was one of their first customer interviews of like, we want to figure out how to make this appeal to people. And I was one of the first like people they interviewed. I was a terrible interview because I don't really use virtual tabletops at the time. I am very much a theatre of the mind kid, and I showed them my extensive Google Drive note system for the campaigns I was running, and they were like, "Oh boy." So I've kind of been around with them and started beta testing them along with my friends like a year or so later, and then I just kept annoying them, giving them suggestions, giving them like constructive feedback of like,
mhm.
you might want to change perhaps this. I also run a couple of actual play podcasts. We are audio only, we're not video, because video is just one step too far on our production level, and we're like, we just want the audio to be incredible, because then it can be listened to literally anywhere without needing to see anything. And we started a new podcast about the same time that they were kind of getting out of beta testing. And I took a punt and said, hey, I would like to work with you. I'd like to set my campaign on your platform. How would you feel about sponsoring some episodes? And they were like, yes, let's do it. Because I'd already met them. They're in Iceland. We just went to see them and we were like, hey, how's it going? And then before we even finished the sponsorship run, a job opportunity came up and they offered it to me in like 3 sentences of a phone call.
Okay.
And I immediately just said yes. So I'd already kind of proven myself in the community, and I'd already done a lot of stuff and introduced them to a lot of people. So I ended up doing that, and that's all because of my actual play work, where I produced 2 podcasts. One is a D&D podcast, and that's been going for, oh my God, 8 years at this point.
Okay.
Old enough to go to school.
What's the name of the podcast?
The Lucky Die.
The Lucky Die. Okay.
Um, and I produce and I run that campaign. A friend of mine does all the editing, and we also started a new podcast recently called The Sprouting, and that's like a year old now. We are so much in the backlog. I think it's going to be going for another 7 years. I don't mean to do this; it just happens. And that's called the Cthulhu, and that's the one that Quest Portal sponsored before I actually started working with them. And I'm a player in a couple of other actual plays as well. I'm one of the players on Dark Dice podcasts, which is another actual play, but very, very heavily edited, so it sounds more like an audio drama, and that's very horror based, and it's just like massive.
Nice.
And yeah, they're just, I know the guy that runs it, and we were voice actors on like a different show of his, and he brought us all to play together to play D&D because he knew I played D&D. And yeah, it kind of spun out to many seasons long with crossovers with my podcast as well. It's been a wild ride. So yeah, all of that kind of like made Quest Portal, whatever my job may have been when I first started, kind of like helped solidify me to get this position and like sort of go with it and meet amazing new publishers and read amazing new stories. And it has been a wild ride.
Very, very cool. It sounds exciting. I know that in our community, there's just a lot to it that you can do, and it sounds like you're embracing it and experiencing, and that's terrific.
Very much so, yeah.
If you don't mind, what first drew you into tabletop role playing? How'd you become a game master?
So like so I've always loved storytelling, and I've always been like telling stories in my head and like playing games and such like. And then when I was 13 or 14 at high school, we got into play by post. So we did the old forum play by post. You type up like whatever it is you want to role play, and then like, the story continues. And then the guy shut the website down so he could become a professional photographer. So that story ended. And then a few years later, a friend of mine came back from university with Dungeons and Dragons 3.5, I think it was, or 4. And she ran a game for us, and we kind of never really stopped afterwards, really.
Okay.
We just kept playing different games, different genres, different systems. And then when we were finishing up one of our D&D campaigns, I said I would love for someone to run a Fallout game, because I love the Fallout franchise, and well, I did at least. And someone was like, "Hey, have you heard of Exodus?" And I looked at Exodus and I'm like, "This is terrible. This is an awful looking book, but it's the only version we had. It was a photocopy of a photocopy." And I picked it up and decided, all right, I'm gonna create my own world. I'm using this as a layout. I'm using the system as a general idea, and I did the thing that I would never suggest to any new DM, which is create an entire new world and can entirely homebrew literally everything. Down to even most of the rules. I would never recommend that on my worst enemy. I don't know how I got through it, but I did. So I've kind of been DMing, probably about 16, 17 years now.
Okay.
It's been a while. And then, yeah, it just kind of spiraled from there, and I'm a forever DM now.
Okay. You mentioned all the different projects where you're a cast member, and how'd you get involved with that? Did just something open up for something else, or just your contacts?
Yes, sort of. So I was playing a home game, and we were making the system, actually the one I was chatting about. And I wanted to be a player for a change, and actually do the thing that I love to do with role-playing games, which is really get into character and really make connections. And I searched online, and one of the only times I've ever used Reddit, I saw someone on Reddit saying, looking for someone who can do voices. I'm like, yeah, I could pretend to do voices. Yeah, so I could totally do this. Like, I can lie. And I applied, and I was one of the only handful of people who did. And I ended up meeting one of my good friends, Neil. He was an editor. He was also a player. Another player who's in my campaign. And through that, I ended up looking out for voice acting gigs. I kind of like this voiceover thing. This is kind of fun. And that's how I met Travis. And then from there, I went into Dark Dice because I voice acted on one of his other shows. And from then, I started voice acting in other shows. And then from there, I went to other streams where we were doing the kind of streaming D&D or streaming this system and that system. And from there, I got invited to other places. And it just kind of spread out and out until I was in something like 12 games, one home game and a bunch of streamed games. And I was obviously recording our podcast at the time. We were year one of our podcast. The Reddit one that we went into just fell apart after a year, and I'm so glad it did. But it was kind of the kickoff for everything. I have since scaled it back. I've had to become a responsible adult with a 9-to-5 job, or 9-to-5-ish job, because of the fact that I've moved to Iceland, so I have to have a full-time job. I can't be part-time to keep my visa. So yeah, I have scaled everything back, and now I only run technically 3/4 storylines, and I'm in 2/3 home games. It's fine. I don't have a problem.
Goodness. I'm glad you had time to be able to do this interview. It sounds like you're very busy. um,
Yes, part of the production of like creating actual plays, especially when you do the audio stuff, is I also do a lot of quality control. So I have to listen back to the episode,
mhm.
write my intros, write my outros, send out scripts to voice actors. It's like there's a lot involved behind the scenes.
No doubt, no doubt. Do you remember the first time you were running a game? How did it go for you?
I was terrified, absolutely terrified. So I did some. I basically lied as I normally do when I start a campaign of saying I have an idea, I have a storyline. That was a sheer lie. So the day before, I panicked on my laptop and wrote up some like world lore and some like general gist. And from like 7 or 8 in the morning until we started playing at 7 or 8 at night, I was just typing away and getting everything together and getting characters together and stuff. And yeah, I was sitting there on the sofa. There were 8 players and me. Hence why we don't have a table. So I've become theatre of the mind. There's no room on my tiny kitchen table for maps and minis and character sheets and drinks. So everybody just sat on the sofas. And I sat there in the armchair with the laptop in my lap, and I was like. I said a few words, a little bit more breathing, and then like 10 minutes later, I'd completely forgotten how nervous I was. Like I was just in it. I was just done. I was like, "Yep, we're here. We're running the game. This is. I'm just reacting. There's no time to panic. I'm just dealing with these assholes sitting on my sofa."
Oh,
Uh, so like 10 minutes in, I'd completely forgotten, and I have that kind of similar fear every time, even when I come to GM now, and I've been doing this for like years and been doing this for years. I still get that little like. Oh, I'm not sure if I'm ready. Oh, I'm not sure I should do this, but 10 minutes in, I know I'm usually fine. So yeah, the first experience was very nerve-wracking, and I have very few memories of actually how the session went. I think I just blocked it from my mind.
all good. What has been your most memorable campaign? And what about it made it stand out to you?
So I have a lot. It's one of those like choose your favorite children, and I'm not sure I can. Like all the campaigns I've run have like so many memorable moments or so many like standout feelings to them, or I'm just really proud of the way that they went. My first one, I was just super proud that I'd finished it. And we've been playing solidly for a year. Everybody had turned up almost every single session, which was not a thing that our group ever did up until that point and didn't afterwards. I was just super happy I got to the end because that made me very much feel like, yeah, unlike the rest of the group, I finished the goddamn story. There was that. And, there were standout moments from that. I remember, like, we had a lot of players who tend to look at their phones a lot. And there was a speech I gave where they came back to, like, their original, like, place where they were born. And no one was looking at their phone when I looked up from my notes and from the speech. Everyone was enraptured looking at me, and I will never forget that. But I've also had moments where the players have completely like thrown me through a loop. I've had moments where I've been playing with players at my table and we're both just in absolute tears and we have to stop like recording or talking because like we've gotten to that point. And I've had my players throw things at me that have like made me almost impossible to speak afterwards. So the lucky die is one such. There's a big spoiler that happens, and one of the player turns a character and says, "How did you fuck that up?" And I couldn't get anything else out for a while. I was just like stunned. But also had absolutely ridiculously comic moments where we're in the middle of a space battle and a player does something completely random. I'm just like, where the hell did that come from? What is this? I think always for me, my most memorable things from a campaign and things that stand out always tends to be the things that the players do that I have nothing to do with. When I sit back for 45 minutes and listen to my role players just role play without a single thing interrupting them, I feel incredible because they are obviously really engaged with what's going on, and I barely have to give them a prompt. I don't have to nudge them, and they come up with plans and ideas, and they talk through their relationships and the things that are happening. Like those stand out to me like intently. And one such example is actually when I wasn't I wasn't the GM, I was actually the player. My now husband and I, we had only met really to record this one thing online. And we just roleplay for like 10 minutes straight. Like, I barely knew this dude. And now he's the love of my life. And it was a very in-depth, intense conversation. And I actually have that moment memorialized as a piece of art because, like, it kicked off so much for us personally and also for the podcast. Like, it was a fairly pivotal moment. So, like, yeah, it's every campaign has something that stands out to me, and most of them more than one. Because if I'm telling a story or I'm involved in a story, I want those memorable moments, and I don't think I really have one that is like more impactful than the other. I know it's a really cop out answer, but it's the truth.
Still a good answer. I appreciate that. Okay, so moving on then. Who or what inspired your approach to game mastering when you first started? Did you
Oh,
have any role
um,
models?
I didn't. Because this is back in the day when actual plays and like yeah, actual plays of any kind just weren't out there. Like when I first started, especially in the area I grew up, it's not something you ever asked anybody if they did. You didn't go, "Hey, do you want to try this role playing?" No, you don't. You don't do that. You belong in the basement. You basement dweller. Like you just don't. You don't talk about that. You barely talked about video gaming, let alone talking about role playing games and tabletop. So yeah, there really wasn't anyone that I could look to and go, "Hey, I like the way they do this," or "Hey, I like this." I was more inspired by the podcasts and the stories that I was listening to at the time, or the media that I was paying attention to. Fallout is an obvious one for me because I still love that. If you add the words apocalyptic setting, I'm there. I don't really care anything else. I'm there. I love this idea. So like yeah, like kind of stories that really push me. Like there was a podcast called We're Alive, and I'd never heard an audio drama, like a proper audio drama
Hmm.
before, of like everything that you can hear, you actually hear. So it's not described, and then he walked down the corridor. No, you hear him walk down the corridor, and then you hear him interact or have conversations. So it really was such a different like flip in my brain of like how I wanted to tell stories. Of like no, it can be really engaging and really in depth. I'm just really glad that we have so many resources now. There are people for us to be inspired by, and there are people who are, weird to say, inspired by things that I've done, and that's super weird for me. But I'm glad it's out there because, yeah, I was probably a really shit DM when I started. I have no idea. I had no idea what the fuck a player agency was. I just went, yeah, you could probably do that. Or like, nah, I don't think you'd probably want to do that. It probably hurts too much. Like, I have no idea what the boundaries were. I had no idea what we were supposed to be doing as a GM or like how, like, player backstories are supposed to play into the background. I hadn't even really run a module before. Like I still haven't run a module, but there's so many resources out there now that people can actually use to get this inspiration from and like have so many different nuanced takes on how to be a GM because every table needs a different GM. Like I would probably not suit anybody else's table because I'm very narrative focused and I don't care about the rules, but I know a lot of people who do and half the fun is the rules. So yeah, there are a lot of folks out there that I think can definitely serve as inspirations, but you should definitely really cherry pick the things that you like and not try and emulate someone else because at the end of the day, you have to pretend to be like a dozen people. The person you should pretend to be is you. That should just be you.
Okay, so any names come to mind, or just is it kind of drawing a blank right now?
So sorry, I'm gonna have to
This
take
is
some water
that's
first.
fine. This is your chance to be able to give them a shout out and just kind of thank them for your influence or whatnot.
So when I was really getting into like the streaming side of like, oh, maybe I could be a professional player streamer. I could make this work, right? I can't because everyone's on American time and I'm British. I started role playing with a guy named Skagath on Twitch, and he is a Swedish bearded Viking, is how he describes himself. He is the sweetest, most amazing person. And I learned about GMing and I learned about how to let players just go with it. It's okay as GM to sit back and let people do stuff. I learned that rules are just there to facilitate the story and it's not really about the rules. If you're there for an intense story, which are the things that people tend to remember, the rules should be there to help and not hinder. And he used to just make up rules. Like he just made up entire systems in like a weekend and be like, yep, this is how we're playing and we'll figure out any kinks and bugs later. And if there's a problem, we'll hand wave it and we'll move on. I played so many different settings and styles of games with him. He was just incredible, and he doesn't stream as much now. He doesn't do as much TTRPG, but like he's an absolutely solid guy, and I love playing with him. I also learned a lot from a streamer called Video Store Cowboy, who was around a lot when I first started. He is one of the only GMs that have ever put up with my bullshit as a player. So I will always do. it's not that I tend to be a problem player. It's just that if you give me a mechanic where I can, put a good berry in someone's mouth, I'm going to do it. Or if I decide to crawl along the ceiling in Blades in the Dark because nobody ever looks up and that's how I argue having an extra dice roll, he'd go with it. He's very, very one of the few people who did that. But like at the moment, I'm very much into like the advice channels, which is a shame because one of my favorite advice channels, How to Be a Great GM, he's stopped doing advice videos. But he was great. He has like such like good takes on like different aspects of GMing. I like really like look to advice on that. And there's a guy, there's a channel called Decrepit Master or Decrept Master. I'll give you the link for it anyway. And they make really like not short videos, but they're very fast paced and they kind of like tell stories as they go along. And he talks very much about like the YouTube struggle, and he talks about like the struggle with players and the struggle with systems, and like he does like really good breakdowns of stuff. And like Ginny D also is just has such great nuanced takes on stuff and isn't afraid to just like push the envelope and be like, yeah, let's give this a try, and this is what I think might be good for you, and this is what I think, and from my experience this might be a thing. And it's just sort of like feels really approachable, so I also really like that. Yeah, it's less of a I listen to actual players and I'm inspired by them. I just listen to advice channels. I'm like, that sounds great, I love this idea.
Well, that's I very much so try and do the same thing. I try to learn as I listen to different people and incorporate it into my methodology. So I could definitely relate to that. How do you? We're going to switch gears just a little bit. We're going to be talking about your philosophy on game mastering. Okay.
Ooh.
I know,
Oh,
right?
coming in.
Here we go. Ratings, baby.
I saw one of your questions here. I'm like, oh, that's gonna be a hot take, buddy.
How do you balance narrative storytelling with player agency?
So I very much like the way I approach the structure of the story is kind of really how I allow as much player agency as I can. It is I have a very broad strokes for what I think the campaign overall looks like. I always think you should have an end in mind. Don't run a story unless you have an end, and it doesn't really matter how you get there, so long as you know roughly how or what the end is, because if you, especially if you're running like a set campaign versus this game's going to last 40 years, which I say that and my campaign is still 8 years long. Like, come on, Cam, what are you doing here? At least have an end goal in mind, so you kind of roughly know where you're going. And that broad strokes, once I have that, I then turn to the players and like, here's like a rough idea on what the world is. Here's the big broad strokes. This is kind of the tone that I want this particular game to be, or where I think the story is. And I'll let them build their backstories, and that's how I help to flesh out some of those paths towards the end. Mm-hmm. Now, they can't be written in stone, because if you're playing a game where death is a real possibility, for example, in Call of Cthulhu, they can't be set in stone to get to that final path. They can just be like the kind of gentle nudgings up towards there. And if the character keeps living, they just fill it out as they go along. So I kind of have that approach to like the overall structure. And then for when they're actually playing and making decisions, I will listen to what they're doing and what they're planning. And then my next prep session will be based around the things that they have decided that they want to do. And
Okay.
the things that they want to do and the people they've engaged with and the NPCs had to make on the fly, those are things they're engaged with and they're things they're interested in. So it helps to flesh those out. If they're not interested in the guard that I created at the bottom of the staircase in the Sailor V, they don't get a backstory. But if they rock up to the radio tower and have a 10-minute conversation with the radio operator, I'll give her some backstory afterwards and I'll weave it backwards to make it feel like she's always been there, which has definitely happened and will be coming up very soon on the Sprouting. The surprise NPC who actually matters now. Thank you very much, guys. So, yeah, for me, I just try and give them as much agency as possible. If they are completely off the rails, I'll just give them a nudge with the story, or I'll just take them after the session or whatever it is and be like, hey, guys, like, I think we're getting too much into this and I kind of want to back up a little bit. I've rarely had to say that because I am very much a, yes, however, let's make it worse. I'm very much that kind of a DM. I enable. I've been called an enabler as a GM, so...
Yeah, that or railroader or something like that. That's what I've been accused of. So, and it's probably well warranted. Have you ever had disruptive players or challenging players at your games?
Yes, actually. So back when I was originally making a role-playing system based on the first game
Hmm.
campaign I ever ran, I did a lot of conventions to get the system like, seen and heard and marketed and all that good stuff and play tested. And alas, I ran a game where I had a player who was absolutely shit-faced. Um, Turned up to the game, decided to take a really long cigarette break, came back with a bunch of booze at the table, which doesn't really worry me that much. I'm not a huge stickler for it, but we're at the point where you're incomprehensible and you're telling other people how to run their characters, or like you just don't listen to what's going on. At that point, I just had to ask the guy to leave the table. Like it was probably the most disruptive, most challenging I've ever had to run a game because at a convention there were three other people at that table. Three other people who had set aside 300+ hours to play a game that has never been released and to give it a shot. So yeah, that was tough because the guy was like much bigger than me and quite intoxicated. But yeah, I just had to stand up and throw him out of the game and basically say you're not coming back. And it was difficult to do, but there were other people at the table who wanted to have fun too. And I was one of those other players, so I just had to ask him to leave. But generally speaking, other than that one incredibly like awkward interaction, I tend to play with folks and players that I know very well. My home group, although we're eight of us, five of the nine of us lived in my house, and the rest were very good friends of ours. And my current home group, they welcomed me in on like the second evening I'd ever spent in Iceland. They were like, "Yeah, come play with us," and I did, and it was amazing. So I'm very blessed that I don't have too awkward a player, and even in my home games, when sometimes alcohol can be a little full. If that's the situation, sometimes you are able to just ignore them
Hmm.
and just carry on the game. Be like, yes, yes, honey, continue drinking. Or sometimes you'll be like, okay, guys, like we're just gonna call it for here because, like, obviously we are more interested in drinking and having fun is the whole point of playing games together. So let's do that instead.
Awesome. Okay, so still sticking with the philosophy part, do you think a game
Uh-oh.
master should prioritize the story, the rules, or the player's enjoyment, and why?
So I have two schools of thought on this.
Okay.
First of all, I prioritize enjoyment of my players at all times. Because if they're not having fun, I'm not having fun. I mean, there are some exceptions, and this is one where the little caveats come in, because if we are doing an intense scene
Hmm.
where someone has betrayed someone, of course they're going to feel bad. That's kind of the point. If they've done something awful and now they're going to jail, of course they should feel bad. Of course they're not supposed to enjoy it. But overall, the experience should be enjoyment, because that's kind of what you're doing. But as someone who's done, a lot of my role playing experience now, weirdly enough, has been in actual plays, either streaming or as a player or as a GM, I have to sometimes override that natural instinct of just saying yes to players to be like, no, no, like the story needs to be pushed on here. I can't just let you ramble for like 3 hours. Like we're going in circles. I have to find an NPC that will interrupt the moment and move the story along.
Hmm.
So like from my actual play hat on, like as a player, I will also go find the story. I won't just be at home when I'm being a dick and I'm like, can I crawl along the ceiling? That's what I would do. Or, how do I use this spell in a way just to annoy you? Like I don't do that as a player. I try and find where the story is. So I kind of focus the story when my story is a presentation, when my story is to be consumed by other people. However, I have also learned in my time that rules matter a lot more to other people than they do to me. And as a GM and as a player in other campaigns, I have to accept that, yeah, sometimes the mechanics do make for fun situations in and of themselves. Whereas I used to almost always say, like, nobody's going to remember whether you rolled a 16 or a 22 on a dice. They remember that they killed the enemy. I know for a fact that isn't true. I've had experiences now where I got to level 18 and so did everybody else. So we all picked up Counterspell and all we remember is counterspelling this guy until he died in lava. It's amazing. And I remember the mechanics. I don't remember the guy's name. I don't remember why we were there. I just remember doing that to the boss in the final fight. But you do also need to prioritize the rules a little bit, because there needs to be it's a game after all. It's not just an improv session. It is a game, and there does need to be some rules in how you engage in that world, so
Okay.
that not everybody is just playing a power creep. So if there were no rules, I could very much say yes. I fly into the setting sun with my wings, and I save the day. Like no, that's there's no risk. There's no weight to the situation that I'm doing. There's no chance of failure if there aren't any rules. So you do need the rules there, and you do need to prioritize them a little bit. Otherwise, things get out of hand really easily. Of like, yeah, of course you can use it in this situation. Why not? I don't say that. I tend to say, in this one situation, let's bend the rules like this because it makes narrative sense or it makes more fun. But having that little caveat of in this moment makes a difference because then you're not stuck with a rule that is overpowered later on. So I kind of tend to do that instead. It's one of those awful things where my answer is it depends, and it should always be done with some nuance.
Always.
And very much, yeah, it very much depends on the situation. If you're in a home game, enjoyment because that's why you're there. If you're presenting a story as a storyteller, the story should take a little bit of precedence. And if you are in a group that really loves the rules, then you definitely should check on the rules and make sure that you're following them and that people enjoy them.
Okay. What is your stance? This is kind of a silly question, but it is a kind of interesting question, a little bit controversial. What is your stance on fudging dice rolls as a game master?
You just want to get me in hot water, don't you?
Hey
Like,
man,
this was that.
this is a hard hitting interview. Let me
All right, then let's turn the tables, my friend. What's no? I won't be a dick.
it's rude to ask a question when asked a question. So.
It's an improv game, questions only.
There we go.
So fudging dice, I used to very much be a like. I don't know. Who cares? The GM should do what they want. They control the rest of the world anyway. Who gives a crap? And then I moved to like, no, like that's the game element. Like the GM should be rolling out in front of everybody, the same as and that should just be that. And you just go where the dice is. Why are you rolling if there aren't consequences? But again, many years of experience, the answer is it depends. And it depends on the situation. And this comes into what do you prioritize, the rules or not? And if you say you prioritize the story or the player's enjoyment, then you probably might want to consider fudging a roll. For example, if I'm in a con game, I will always hide my dice. And that's because at con games, you may have a player who has never played before and they are really getting into their level 1 paladin and they're really like picking up the mantle of being this holy warrior, and then through the fate of dice which you have to roll in front of them, you roll a natural 20 and the dice roll high and you kill them in one go. Is that fun for anyone? And the answer is no, it's not. That is a shitty experience for a first-time player. So yeah, you should absolutely hide and fudge your dice in that situation. You want to encourage people to roleplay, and it's a con game. It's okay. It's absolutely okay to do that. And if you're running a home game or a story-based game, if there is a narratively important moment, does it matter if the paladin has to, if someone has, a wealth of hit points, so say like 400 or some ridiculous number, and there's 50 left and someone pulls out a crit and they beautifully describe how they're doing it, and it's an incredibly important moment for this character, do you really have to go through the rigmarole of another 30 points when there is a narratively beautiful moment here? And that's down to you as a GM. That's whether you prioritize the story, the enjoyment, or the rules. And if you always go for, I will never fudge my dice ever and have such a hard stance, you are prioritizing the rules. And that leaves a little less room for nuance, which I think is sorely needed. There is no one way to GM, and it does not apply in every situation. So I've just chilled. I'm like, it's fine. If you want to play a hard-hitting game, roll in front of people, and that's totally fine. If you need to fudge the dice, do it, but don't be an asshat. You know when you're being an asshat about it. You know when you're being a dickhead. Just don't do that.
Well said, all of it. Okay, so let me tie this back to Quest Portal. How can Quest Portal help create a sense of immersion for your players? How can it help them with some of the stuff we're talking about?
So, like, a lot of the stuff on, like, virtual tabletop. So, a lot of what I've done has been Theatre of the Mind.
Mm-hmm.
So, a lot of virtual tabletops, like, one of the strengths they have is that rather than me needing to put a map in front of 8 people around a tiny-ass table which can't take that, I can put those images onto Quest Portals. So, rather than me only describing something, there is a visual aid that can help people, because words alone are not how most people see stuff. They need to see a representation. And some people can, some people will take that representation like way too far. It's just a picture or something, a generated image or whatever. And someone has like a pink, feather in their hair. They'll take that image too far. I'm like, no, they don't have it. But having images and maps really helps people to see, inverted commas, where they are, to really actually help them plan out what their moves are going to be. So if like there's a system that's very heavily reliant on flanking, or like really heavily reliant on like line of sight for example, you can really have that by having a map available to them.
Okay.
And on Quest Portal, we can do things like, you have like your fog of war, so you can hide stuff as you go along, so your players only see what their characters would see. You can also have variants of maps as well. So if you have a map in the day and a map at night and a map that has been looted, like it can be the same base map, but you can just click variants on the thing and then you can go to your next prepared variant of that map. So it looks the same until you reach it at night, and then you click the night version and boom, it's the night version. So it kind of really helps to have those. And we also have music in there, so that you're able to create a playlist of like atmospheric music. And we have a lot of really good like pre-built assets in there, of like from variously big creators, some fairly big, some fairly small, so that there's a big mix of music in there, and music can make a massive difference to players. Some folks are very oral. They're really good when they have music. They can see things better when they have that.
Okay.
I don't know what the fancy word for that is. So you can really set and build up the tension if you have a really good piece of music in there. And you can find a lot of those kind of like emotional pieces in there. Like when we added a bunch of them, when I was adding like the stuff from our podcast, and we're just like, here, have our music. I know what this means. Of like, this is building tension. This is like whimsy. This is joy. Like those music in the way it's used in like film and TV is there to help set a tone and to set a mood. Like it kind of tells you what to feel. If there is a fast racing pace to the drum beats and they're really heavy, your heart will kind of want to mimic that. It doesn't, but you kind of get the idea that you should be like ramping up your adrenaline levels, which kind of makes things more tense. And if there's something light and wistful, we've begun to learn that no, that's a chill, happy, nice sound. I should feel good like this. And that really helps to build like the emotions that you're going for the scene. So like we have those like definitely available in there for folks when they're building scenes.
So can you fudge dice rolls?
You cannot. You can, however, hide your rolls.
There you go.
So if you roll from so notes are kind of done in two ways. There is a private note section, which is private to each account. So I can't see yours, for example. And then there's campaign notes, which everybody can see and everybody can interact with. If I roll a dice from my private notes, nobody else will be able to see that roll. And in character sheets, if you have a hidden tab, the only people who can see those rolls are the GM and the player. So you can whisper rolls at each other like that. Like, if you wanted to like whisper, actually, I'm going to do an insight check on that asshole. Sure, you can roll that and no one else will know. But as a GM, if I roll from a hidden tab or from that, nobody can see it but me.
All good. Okay, so we're going to switch gears once again, and we're going to be talking about crafting worlds and narratives. Something you talked about, and I know that's something you like. How do you approach world building in your campaigns, and how can Quest Portal help expedite the process?
So, again, like generally, like I spoke a little bit before, like when I go to create worlds and stories, I kind of have a general story idea first of like, these are really sketchy lines of where I think we'll end up and the beats I want to hit. And then I make the world to make that storyline better, or it will influence the storyline. Because as you write, it kind of sometimes affects the story too. I'm like, yeah, that's totally fine. Questball has a really good subscription feature called AI Assistant and AI Assistant in Notes. So AI Assistant works a lot like ChatGPT. It's actually based off of one of their kind of like out-of-the-box things. And you can ask that questions like, hey, I need an NPC that comes from this kind of a place and I want them to have this kind of like magical ability. Can you give me their backstory and what loot they might have?
Okay.
So you can like begin to build it like that. You can also like, hey, can you look at this note, like especially AI in Notes. It's kind of less ChatGPT, more very specifically built for very specific prompts. So like you can do backstories and you can do loot tables and quest starts and you can do like, fight orientations, like those kind of things. But you can be like, hey, can you look at this note, which has information about like the inn that I have just described or had generated. And I want you to make an NPC that sits in the corner with a dark shadow. Give me all the information I need to know about him. And can you create a stat block while you're at it? Stat blocks are my personal bane. I spent many years just writing down hit point numbers and what you have to roll to hit their AC, and I just went from that. I did those on the fly. I hate myself. It's awful. But Quest Portal, for example, I can be like, hey, quickly give me a stat block for a roaming mobster in like the 1940s, and give him an appropriate name for the era, and it will populate a character sheet. It will give me backstory information, and it will give me stats. So like for me personally, getting those stat blocks are like, and getting like spell blocks as well, or like maneuvers, getting those like generated out helps me helps me because I'm really bad at it, and I would never write it down otherwise. And that has led to some hilarious fuck ups in how things have been described in the past, but I don't need to worry about that anymore. I have them all prepared and ready to go. And I know folks that will use like the assistant in notes to like help them generate like lore and minute details about like, you know, entire like lost civilizations, everything from their currency down to the type of food that they eat. And they'll keep the things that they like, they'll delete the things they don't like, they'll ask it for reiterations, or they'll take what they've given and they'll change it. Like, this is so close and I like this idea and I'm inspired by this one and I'll feed it in over here. And having something that can create ideas and create information and inspire you to do other things can be the difference between your story coming out and not.
Okay.
And I've heard from a lot of folks who've used it of like, yeah, like I'm now telling a story that I wanted to tell, but I never had the confidence to do it because the idea of starting from a blank page with absolutely nothing is such a blocker for a lot of people. And yeah, I think having our resource to help people do that, it definitely makes things a lot faster. It makes it faster for me as a GM who's very lazy, and it makes it possible for some people to even be able to pick up the kind of GM's torch, which is kind of what we're very much about, of like, we want more GMs. There's not enough of us. We want to play more, please. It helps people be like inspired and to feel comfortable running a game. Of like, I feel prepared because I have something written down versus everything has to come off the top of my head and I have to think about everything. It's like, I can put some of that heavy work on here, and the things I really want to talk about and the things I really want to prepare, I have the time to do that now. So yeah, like it really helps a lot of people to tell worlds. And I've played a few games where people have used the assistant and the notes to actually like generate worlds and tell stories. And I'm working with so many publishers now who've been like using our software to like, you know, create stories worth telling, and it's super exciting to see.
Oh, that's very cool. Um, what advice do you have for GMs who struggle with improvisation through sessions?
Um, First of all, almost everything you do is probably improv anyway. From the moment that you start describing something, it may be straight off the sheet, but the second somebody asks you a question, you have responded, that you've already started your improv progress. If you really struggle with improv, is prepare, but don't over prepare. So like leave tiny little holes and think about how you might answer that, and then come back a little bit later and think about how you might answer it again. And it's a process you have to do kind of before you actually sit in the session, of not preparing every individual line, but kind of think of it more as a bullet point and looking at it one day and going, okay, if I was going to sit here with someone, pretend that someone is there, kind of talk it out, and then come back the next day and do the same thing with the same prompts, and you'll begin to flow a little bit easier, of like, yeah, I've kind of prepared this and I've kind of practiced this, and I know like if this comes up, I might be able to say this. I'm very much a GM who thinks a lot about the world outside of session. And that helps me because I prepare and practice, but I can tell you none of my practices are anywhere near what actually happens in game. Yeah, exactly. It's like the conversation that you practice in your head never comes out, and you probably never even start that conversation. And it's a similar sort of thing for role playing. But also remember that notes are your friend. If you are sort of in the middle of something and the players are talking, you can write notes about what just happened, and you can fix any errors that you may have accidentally made in between sessions. So if you accidentally describe, a creature being much bigger than you thought it was going to be, and then you look at the stat block and, oh my God, it says tiny. Nobody's going to know what's behind the screen. Just cross it out and put giant and give it some extra stats. You can fix those things that might be a big continuity error. You can fix that later. But also, if you're in a home game, it's okay to tell your players, hey, I kind of made a tiny boo-boo. They're your friends, and if they judge you for that, then tell them to go fuck themselves. They should run a game instead. It's totally fine to come back to your group and say, like, hey, I made a mistake, or can we change this? Like, your home group should be fine with that. And yeah, if you are uncomfortable with improv, it's just, unfortunately, a matter of practice. Also, knowing the material that you have doesn't have to be 100%, but the more you go over it, the more it kind of like sticks in your mind, and let it inspire you to think about scenes outside of like the direct prep session. If you're like me and you prep right up to the minute of like 60 minutes ago, I hadn't even thought about this. That happens, but I guarantee that I think about the scenes throughout the entire week of just like different scenarios and different things, and just, let your mind wander and think about what the game, even if it's a homebrew, even if it's a module, there are scenes in there that you can just let your mind think about and kind of like work through that ahead of time. So it's a fair bit of prep to be good at improv, and it is a skill. You do just have to practice it. And I highly suggest practicing it amongst friends. Have fun with that. I spent like 4 years practicing in front of my friends in stupid voices you've ever heard. It's how I got comfortable with it. So yeah, I don't have any like hard and fast rules. Just think about it outside of prep. The story is more than just the prep.
Very cool. All right, we're going to pivot again to another topic. And right
Oh my
now,
gosh,
I
I'm
know,
like
right?
dancing with you, dude.
Ta-da. This is the role of online table. This is y'all's role specifically in the online tabletop role-playing community. Okay. What do you think is the biggest challenge right now being faced by game masters in the modern TTRPG community?
Ooh, so there are, in my opinion, like a lot of like challenges. I don't necessarily think one may be bigger than the other, but some of them actually comes down to kind of what we were chatting about before. Actually, is that when I started, I had no yardstick, I had no inspiration, but I also had no one to be compared against. And a lot of folks who are getting into role playing games, they see professionally produced actual plays, be they audio or be they otherwise, with really high production values, and GMs that live and breathe this world because they either pay to or they make it so that they can be paid to do this. There is such a difference between what I consider an actual play and what I do for a home game. The things I let go on a home game are vastly different to what I would do story-wise for an actual play. And a lot of players coming in and a lot of DMs who are just starting think they have to be Brennan Lee Mulligan, or they have to be a Matt Mercer's, or they have to be any number of other like GMs. And the answer is you don't have to have that added pressure. That's kind of like one random side effect. It's a good thing we have people to be inspired by now, but people also expect to be crying at every session. They expect to be laughing their ass off every session. They expect there to be a fight every session. Like, the expectations for GMs have risen in a way that is most people don't play on the same level. A lot of people just play at home. So there's kind of like a big difference in that. And a lot of people expect things to be run. I'm actually talking back on the improv thing. A lot of people expect the DMs to have the answers instantly, of like, this is a character that has clearly had to be made up because you suddenly got interested in a random like tidbit of information. There was a guy in the corner with a frog or something. Like, that person now becomes the most interesting, but they never existed before. They expect GMs to be able to instantly respond to things, and especially if they're not comfortable with improv. They expect such a higher standard, and I think that is a good thing and a bad thing. It makes us better as GMs, but I think it's a really good bar to entry. And like, one of the other kind of like challenges I think we have as GMs is also being expected to know every single rule. I started my first podcast and I didn't really know the rules of D&D at all, and I still don't really know the rules. I still don't really know the rules for Call of Cthulhu, but that shouldn't stop you running a game. And again, especially
It's
since we've done Call of
storytelling.
Cthulhu.
It's storytelling. You can do this.
Exactly, you can get away with a lot, especially also if you have like one really good thing is make use of your rules lawyer.
Mhm.
There is someone at the table who knows the rules better than you. You can ask for their opinion and their ideas and make a decision based on what they say. You can say, actually, how does the flanking rule work? Well, actually, technically, it doesn't have a flanking rule here. Like, okay, great, then we'll make a flanking rule. Um, or how does counterspell work? Do you have to see it? Well, actually, you do. You know what? No, you don't. Like you can use the rules lawyers at the table to really help you. Basically make a decision. They'll give you the information, and just like the captain at sea, you have the final say. You are the GM. And to be fair, your table can also say, actually, we really want this one rule. Roll with it. It's totally fine. And kind of swinging a little bit back to Quest Portal on this. This is where I have also found having assistant really helpful. So yeah, I started my Call of Cthulhu podcast on Quest Portal as our virtual tabletop, and I don't really know the rules of Cthulhu that very well, and it's very obvious in some places. But for example, if I don't know the shotgun rules, I can just ask the assistant, "Hey, what are the shotgun rules at like close range, far range? What's the misfires on this?" So I can just ask it the rules and it will give me information based on the system that I'm playing. So if I'm playing Blades in the Dark and I'm shooting a gun, it won't give me the same rules as you would get from Call of Cthulhu, for example. So I am more comfortable running different systems that I've never played before because I have someone to ask and they won't judge me for not knowing the answer. It will always be like, sure, how can I help you? That's the rules for shotguns. Anything else that can help you? I'm like, yes, please give me the stat block for a Call of Cthulhu shotgun. So yeah, like we aim to help some of those challenges of like making it a lot easier to get over some of these problems. Of like, yeah, here's if you're not quite comfortable at improv straight away, it's something you learn. In the meantime, you can ask the assistant like, hey, like what would this person have in their inventory? What would their backstory be like? Or you can go, hey, what's the rules for this? And while you're at it, can you give me the stat block? So like we try and help out a little bit there, but those are some of the challenges I think that we face like as a TTRPG group.
Okay.
There are some other hot button things I don't really want to go into. That's definitely beyond how can I help. These are big cultural shifts that we need to be better at navigating through.
All right. I hope I don't touch on one of those bombs here in a second. But
Let's put it like this: you asked me the fudging question, so
guilty. I'm not even going to apologize for that. So
I'm going to ask you that. I'm going to ask your opinion. When
that's
we get to the
fine
end of this.
because I can edit it out. I'm good to go.
God damn it!
How has the rise of actual play content and streaming impacted the way that you approach game mastering?
Oh boy,
Because
this
you are in
huh?
the thick of it,
Yeah, very much so. I've done almost everything in actual
right?
play. I've been a player, I've produced, I've been a GM, I've streamed as a GM, I've streamed as a player. Oh boy, howdy. So I try. No, that's a terrible way of phrasing it. I
Okay.
have learned something from everyone that I have worked with, weirdly, in this little industry. I have been with GMs who have a very set story. Like, here is the story I want to tell. Here are the railroads. And God bless, I don't like railroads, but holy shit, did he hide them and make them mechanically beautiful? I'm just like, I respect what you have done here, sir. If I look back, I get teleported to the back of this, at the beginning of this damn dungeon. Oh boy, howdy, I don't want to do this dungeon again. You know what, sir? Well played. Well fucking played. Travis from Dark Dice. I love him very, very much. I don't know if he cut that from the episode, but at the moment I saw what he had done, I'm like, I have to respect you for what you have done. And like, yeah, like the way that he is beautifully like covered over and the way that he sets a scene, like it's great. Like I've worked with him, I've co-GM'd with him when we did the crossover, and I learned how he structures his notes and like how he writes everything out like very precisely because that's the way that he DMs. And like yeah, I like the way that it's all written out properly. It's just I write out like that and it doesn't necessarily come out of my mouth like that. So I've kind of learned that from him and from GMing and from being a player on Skagga stream. I've kind of learned that, yeah, the rules aren't the be all and end all. The be all and end all is how much fun you had at the table. And I've learned from, from other folks I played with, video store who very much were like, here are the rules. You have a dumb idea. How do I make the rules work? Of like, yeah, they matter. They have to have a consequence to what I'm doing. And I really love that kind of sort of thing. It's very much affected the way I game master in that I learn what I like about what they do and I try and emulate a bit of that. So I I've also learned not to go too OTT with descriptions because when I listen back to that, oh my god, that is boring. If I've done like a 5 minute monologue, unless it's to set a very particular scene, that's probably too long. I can roll back what I wrote a little bit, chill. People will ask questions, and that's the best way to get engagement is to wait for those questions to come in. So, yeah, I've learned that my I'm gonna say professional, but that's not what I mean. My on-screen persona of how I GM versus how I home GM. I take some of the stuff that I've learned from online, being better at writing descriptions, knowing the rules much better, and bringing those like back to my home group of like, yep, I know the rules a bit better. I'm kind of way more structured than I used to be. And it's not completely loosey-goosey and filled with plot holes. The one biggest thing I will say I ever learned from being in an actual play, and it was the very first one I was involved in that no longer exists on the internet, is timelines. Fucking around with timelines is a bad idea. Write your timelines of what happened before in the general sense and roughly write out what is happening in your games, roughly in the timeline. I currently have in my Call of Cthulhu game the party split 3 ways at the same time. So now I'm having to navigate 3 time streams and make sure everything lines up. Timelines matter. In the podcast that shall not be named from way back when, there was a huge continuity error that went out on across like 3 episodes, and it wasn't caught by us, it wasn't caught by the GM, but then the GM kind of freely admitted that he never had a timeline. He was just making the whole thing up as he went along, and that was bad because there was like a 90-year plot hole that just ruined something for another player, and it was like really bad. So yeah, from that I now have a very structured timeline of what happened previously and roughly what's happening now. I honestly have let it slip the closer towards the end I've gone because I don't feel it matters quite as much anymore. But yeah, have at least a rough timeline in place. And again, if you have to, just tell your players you made a tiny mistake and it's X amount back or X amount forward. So yeah, timelines. Oh boy.
Stay away from them. Just stay away.
Yeah, as a seasoned fuck around of timelines, yeah, don't split the party.
Okay. How do you feel about the responsibility of representing diversity and inclusion in your game?
It's super important. Like there's a couple of good reasons for that. One is that, you should be doing research into like and understanding better of like the people around us.
Okay.
Like, if you're in a group that's just all dudes, maybe throw in a couple of female chicks in there, maybe a couple of non-binaries. Like it doesn't hurt you to do that and maybe earn a tiny little bit of empathy while you're at it, because that's a lot of what role-playing games is putting yourself in other people's shoes, and the only way to really do that is to just do that, especially as a GM. Like you need to be able to represent a whole range of people. Not only is that important for like, yeah, of making sure that people experience things that aren't the norm, which is kind of what fantasy and everything and sci-fi is all about, really. But it also makes you a better GM. If they always meet Pete the Builder, you're going to have an incredibly bland and boring story. If you meet Pete the Builder but as an orc or as, a Gelf or as a High Lord Noble, Pete the Builder will get incredibly boring very quickly. So from a story point of view, you want to be as diverse as you can get. And reading into other cultures and other ideas and even other languages makes your story so much more rich, and you can explain to people after, it's like, actually, yeah, I found this, and this is what I used to do when I first started, was like I used to dive a lot into Latin and phrases and learning that, and like a lot of Greek. And when I moved to Iceland, I started putting a lot more Icelandic in there and like bringing up Icelandic stories and lore, and like sliding those in a way that only my Icelandic player would ever notice. But it was great because we all got to learn a little bit more as we went along. It made the story much, much more interesting. So yeah, it's super important.
Okay. What advice would you give an aspiring GM looking to make a name for themselves online?
I would recommend a few videos, and actually, surprisingly, they all came out in the last couple of weeks.
Okay.
So two of the fairly big names in like the YouTube D&D space have basically said goodbye to D&D YouTube. One being How to Be a Great GM, which I mentioned previously, and another one being something short, and I will find the name, I promise. And they kind of like have said goodbye to that. There have been a couple of really good follow-up videos, one from Decrepit Master and one from Dungeon Crafts, that basically break down why these people are leaving D&D YouTube and what we learn from that. And what we learn from that is that if you are trying to make content in this kind of like RPG world that we're in, you have to do D&D. That's just the bottom line. And we too have found this at Questpool, is that, you know, a majority of our games are either straight up D&D or they're D&D compatible or D&D advancements. Like there's a lot of them out there. I'm not going to name them, but there is a lot of them out there that use 5e as a basis, and
Okay.
that's for a good reason. It's accessible because it's out there. It's out there everywhere. If you put TTRPG in your title, if you're doing a YouTube series or anything like that, you don't get anywhere near as much as if you put the words D&D. And that's just the truth of the numbers. That's just how that works. You can put like the best TTRPG since, you know, I don't know, the best TTRPG for Settlers of Catan. You have to put D&D but Settlers of Catan. The difference in that will be thousands of views, not a small amount.
Okay.
So that's kind of like one thing you have to be really aware is, where is the zeitgeist and where are people talking about right now? And of course there's a big D&D uplift because there's D&D 5.5 or 5 plus or 6, whatever it is they're calling it, whatever it's being referred to as these days, 5.5 in our home group. So yeah, like you have to do that. You have to look into that system. Also, you need to have some really good opinions. If you want to make yourself like a name, you have to be able to offer something that is either different, appeals to the masses, or incredibly niche. Incredibly niche is, unfortunately, if you make it big, you make it big. But you need the right amount of audience there, and your presentation needs to be really good. Even if you are on YouTube, or if you're streaming, or if you're an audio-only podcast, or even if you're running games professionally, for example, you need to have good audio, because that's how you interact with most of the world. If you
Okay.
have a terrible, and I can see it, and I'm not judging your headset mic, if you have a terrible headset mic, or you're using the mic from your webcam, or you're using your, God forbid, a laptop microphone, people aren't going to be able to hear you as well, which means they're not going to engage. Bad audio turns you off of everything so much faster than bad visuals. So make sure you have good audio and do your research on that. Some headset mics, great, you can get away with that and it's totally fine. You will never, in my opinion, get away with a laptop mic. Please don't do that.
I understand.
Just no, please don't.
I just got my wrist slapped. Oh my gosh. I feel like with Chris
Hey,
Rock and
this is payback for that
there it
fucking
is.
question, mate.
All right.
But yeah, like making your name for yourself. If you really want to treat being a pro GM or being a content maker for TTRPGs, you really want to make it big to the point where you can actually live off it, you have to treat it like a job. You have to treat it like a business. It can't just be a hobby thing that I made it big because I did this hobby thing. That's almost pure bullshit these days.
Right.
You have to play the algorithm. You have to know what the kind of search terms are. You have to know how long your content needs to be. You need to know the demographic that you're applying to. You need to know the difference between useful comments in your comment section or feedback and what is just pure trash. Because at the end of the day, comments are useful for getting guidance and like, yeah, this is kind of maybe true or maybe not, but numbers don't lie. One of the videos, and I'm going to give you a link to the ones I'm chatting about. One of the videos that I was watching basically talks about the fact of like, yeah, everybody in the comments is saying, I can't believe that you're doing this now. Oh my God, you're such a faker. When that's simply not the truth. It's not the content it was making, but also more people watched the other content anyway. So the numbers basically said, despite the comments being 100% negative, all the numbers were continuing to rise. So clearly something is happening, right? The
No bad
vocal,
publicity.
angry bottom half of the internet. You don't
Right.
have to listen to them. But yeah, you have to treat it like a business. You have to know where your niches are. You have to know who you're appealing to. And yeah, if you're looking, for example, to create a business out of being a professional GM, you have to know your audience. You have to constantly be on the grind, because no one's going to do your marketing for you except you. The algorithms will get you so far, but if you aren't pushing it, it's not going to get pushed. So yeah, it is this a hobby or is this a job or is this a hobby that does okay? They all have different commitment levels, and it's the same as anyone starting a new business. If you start a business from fresh and you don't have any capital, you are working two jobs, the one to support you and the one to get you where you want to be. It's the same as anything else.
That's fair. All right, so our last question, actually. I know, right? What is your vision for the future of tabletop RPGs, and how do you see yourself in Quest Portal contributing to that evolution?
My ideal future for what I would like to see for tabletop role playing games is that we have a huge range of role playing games that suit different GMs and different tables and different genres. So we're not all just taking one system and re-flavoring it, or
Hmm.
taking one monster stat and re-flavoring it, or taking it's fantasy but set in space. Like, there are so many amazing systems out there that we should be looking at and playing. And first of all, Quest Portal can help with that because we have them on our library. We have bunches of like indie creators already on our on our platform that you can go play right now. We have yet another role play that died. We have the amazing Kill the D20 systems that are being added to this very soon. We have Star, we have Liberty After, and we have so many good stories that are out there. And my future is that we get to see a bunch of new stories coming out that were never going to be out there. Like our AI system and our generator and all the things that we have to help GMs feel comfortable GMing, or new GMs like, actually, I don't have to learn everything all at once. I don't have to be amazing at everything all at once. I have a backup system. I have a system that can support me where I need it, or, for the experienced GM, the super lazy ones who just can't be asked for stat blocks, have something there that helps. Like, telling stories and having more GMs is something that we really want, not just for a business sense. Like, it makes sense to have like new systems out there and to support them and give them a place to call home. A lot of virtual tabletops out there is expensive to even get in and get your system on there or get character sheets on there, and we are aiming to not make that difficult. I mean, you can email me, hem@questportal.com. If you have a system that's worth a damn, I will help you get it on here. That's my job. I don't care if you want to put it up for free. I don't care if you want to monetize it. I will figure it out.
I vouch for that. This is true.
Thank you. I would do my best to help you in any way possible because, business-wise, it makes sense. Even if it's free, it brings people to the platform and, all the good stuff. But also from a very selfish point of view, I don't want to have to keep GMing. I want to play more games. I want to play a variety of games. I want more GMs out there who feel like, yeah, you know what? If I don't know the rules, it's totally fine. If I don't feel great at improving this sudden character backstory because I accidentally mentioned a frog who's sitting next to, a toadstool who's sitting next to, a raven-looking man, great. Just quickly ask the assistant and they'll help you. I want to inspire GMs to play, to just, I'm going to give it a shot because I think inevitably we're going to have more interesting stories to tell overall. Because there is nothing, and I mean nothing, like tabletop role-playing games compared to any other media that I've like consumed. I've read books and felt like emotionally stung. I've watched TV and movie and I've bawled my eyes out. I have never had such an emotional, lasting impact than I've ever had from role-playing games. And for a while, role-playing games, tabletop role-playing games, ruined my ability to enjoy video games. I could no longer play things like Fallout or Skyrim. I was done. I could not play these anymore because I'm looking for that connection. I'm looking for that experience that is not replicated anywhere else, in my opinion. And the more you play, the more empathy that you learn. The more you learn that, yeah, everybody has a story that you just don't know about. Someone having a bad day can be a dick to you and actually be the nicest person in the world. They just have so much going on. And, it's helped you see things from a different point of view, and I love that, and that's what I want to see in the future. I want to see everybody at least giving it a shot and playing, either as a player or as a GM. No matter whether you can't afford the book, you still have the SRD. Whether you can afford a computer or not, because our app works on mobile. You can almost GM from it, and we're making strides to make that a possibility this year. Of like, you don't need a heavy, expensive laptop, you don't need a computer, you don't need my stupid microphone setup that you have here. You can run and play everything off of your phone. It has your character sheet, has your notes, has your dice. I've already heard of when I did customer interviews of, yeah, we had to run away from a hurricane, but we still played because we didn't lose anything. Everything was on our phones. We need the escape. We need the escapism. So yeah, like that's super important to us and very important to me, personally also.
Very cool. Well, Helm, thank you so much for taking time to visit with us. If you don't mind, is there anything that you want to say? A last plug for Quest Portal, or maybe shout out to a friend or something like that? Hi, Mom. Whatever you like.
So, yes, I go check out Quest Portal, questportal.com. We are an indie, that's terrible. I'm using, so I have many hats that I wear. I have my actual play hat, and I have my Quest Portal hat. We are a startup company based out of Iceland. There's only 9 of us, 7 of which are programmers. I am not one of them. We are using the power of AI to help take off those tasks that as a GM you just don't have the bandwidth for. For example, making stat blocks, or you don't feel comfortable enough yet. For example, asking, like, what are the kind of rules for this stuff? We have free versions that don't have access to any of the AI. You are perfectly capable of using almost the entirety of Quest Portal without it. Most of my home group don't have Quest Portal Pro, partially because I'm stingy and I won't help them out unless they ask, but because they just don't need it. Notes are an amazing feature. You can link other notes in your notes and character sheets, which is incredible, and everybody can edit it all at once. We have drawing tools, we have Fog of War, and the interface is beautiful. It's one of the things that made me go, I want to run my game on here. And then when I joined them, they were like, we promise you there will never be a light mode. I'm like, yes, I agree to your terms and conditions. I will work here. Just go check it out. It's free to use. There is a 7-day free trial, and if you send me a message and you're an indie creator of any level, be you a huge publisher or you're one man sitting in his garage who wants to tell a story and here's a lore book for a setting, send me a message and I will help you out the best that I can.
Excellent. Well, listen, again, thank you so much, Em, for taking time to visit with us. I hope that people watching this will get as much out of it as I have. And this has been a lot of fun. So, guys and gals, again, thank you so much for plugging in. Y'all, I just hope that you're enjoying this content. And again, if you got questions, put it down in the comments area. I'm sure he'll be glad to check it out. I'll be monitoring as well, and looking for interaction. If you have suggestions in regards to people you might want to see interviewed, or topics you might want to see covered, let us know. We're not afraid of anything. As you see, I'm not afraid to ask hard questions like fudging dice rolls.
That has to be something you ask everyone. You can't only put me in the spotlight, my friend.
Oh yes, you're right. So, again, thank you so much, guys. And we'll go ahead and drop it here, and take care. God bless. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
3, 2, 1.